David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 28, Mr. Micawber's Gauntlet. Until the day arrived on which I was to entertain my newly found old friends, I lived principally on Dora and coffee. In my lovelorn condition, my appetite languished, and I was glad of it, for I felt as though it would have been an act of perfidy toward Dora to have natural relish for my dinner. On the occasion of this domestic little party, I merely provided a pair of soles, a small leg of mutton, and a pigeon pie. Mrs. Krupp broke out into rebellion on my first bashful hint in reference to the cooking of the fish and joint, and said, with a dignified sense of injury, "No, no, sir, you will not ask me such a thing, for you are better acquainted with me than to suppose me capable of doing what I cannot do with ample satisfaction to my own feelings." But in the end a compromise was effected, and Mrs. Krupp consented to achieve this feat on condition that I dined from home for a fortnight afterwards. And here I may remark that what I underwent from Mrs. Krupp in consequence of the tyranny she established over me was dreadful. I never was so much afraid of anyone. We made a compromise of everything. If I hesitated, she was taken with that wonderful disorder which was always lying in ambush in her system, ready at the shortest notice to prey upon her vitals. I would have done anything in an honorable way rather than give Mrs. Krupp offense. At the appointed time, my three visitors arrived. Mr. Micawber, with more shirt collar than usual, and a new ribbon in his eyeglass. Mrs. Micawber, the cap in her witty brown paper parcel. Mrs. Micawber, with her cap in a witty brown paper parcel, Traddles carrying the parcel and supporting Mrs. Micawber on his arm. They were all delighted with my residence. "My dear Copperfield," said Mr. Micawber, "this is luxurious. This is a way of life which reminds me of the period when I was myself in a state of celibacy, and Mrs. Micawber had not yet been solicited to plight her faith at the hymeneal altar." "He means solicited by him, Mr. Copperfield," said Mrs. Micawber archly. "He cannot answer for others." "My dear," returned Mr. Micawber with sudden seriousness, "I have no desire to answer for others. I am too well aware that when, in the inscrutable decrees of fate, you were reserved for me, it is possible you may have been reserved for one, destined after a protracted struggle at length to fall a victim to pecuniary involvements of a complicated nature. I understand your illusion, my love. I regret it, but I can bear it." "Micawber!" exclaimed Mrs. Micawber in tears. "Have I deserved this? I, who have never deserted you, who never will desert you, Micawber?" Mr. Micawber then embraced Mrs. Micawber and pressed my hand. To divert his thoughts, I informed Mr. Micawber that I relied upon him for a bowl of punch, and led him to the lemons. His recent despondency, not to say despair, was gone in a moment. I never saw a man so thoroughly enjoy himself amid the fragrance of lemon peel and sugar, the odor of burning rum, and the steam of boiling water, as Mr. Micawber did that afternoon. As to Mrs. Micawber, the lark was never gayer than that excellent woman. I never ventured to inquire, but I suppose that Mrs. Krupp, after frying the soles, was taken ill, because we broke down at that point. The leg of mutton came up very red within, and very pale without, besides having a foreign substance of a gritty nature sprinkled over it, as if it had had a fall into the ashes of that remarkable kitchen fireplace. The pigeon pie was not bad, but it was a delusive pie, the crust being like a disappointing head, phrenologically speaking, full of lumps and bumps, with nothing particular underneath. In short, the banquet was such a failure that I should have been quite unhappy if I had not been relieved by the great good humor of my company, and by a bright suggestion from Mr. Micawber. "My dear friend Copperfield," said Mr. Micawber, "accidents will occur in the best regulated families, and in families not regulated by that pervading influence which sanctifies while it enhances I would say, in short, by the influence of woman, in the lofty character of wife. They may be expected with confidence, and must be borne with philosophy. If you will allow me to take the liberty of remarking that there are few comestibles better in their way than a devil, and that I believe with a little division of labor we could accomplish a good one, I would put it to you that this little misfortune may be easily repaired. There was a gridiron in the pantry on which my morning rasher of bacon was cooked. We had it in a twinkling, and immediately applied ourselves to carrying Mr. Micawber's idea into effect. The division of labor to which he referred was this. Traddles cut the mutton into slices. Mrs. Micawber, who could do anything of this sort to perfection, covered them with pepper, mustard, salt, and cayenne. I put them on the gridiron, turned them with a fork, and took them off under Mr. Micawber's direction, and Mrs. Micawber heated and continually stirred some mushroom ketchup in a little saucepan. When we had slices enough done to begin upon, we fed two, with our sleeves still tucked up at the wrists, more slices sputtering and blazing on the fire, and our attention divided between the mutton on our plates and the mutton then preparing. What with the novelty of this cookery, the excellence of it, the bustle of it, the frequent starting up to look after it, the frequent sitting down to dispose of it,